Without a funeral representative, your estate plan is incomplete. So think about this. You've named a trustee who's going to settle your trust, probably have a personal representative who's going to probate your will, and you've named agents as in your powers of attorney and in your patient advocate to make medical decisions for you, or in your power of attorney to manage assets if you become incapacitated. Question: after all of that, is there anything else that you need to do? Well, one of the things that we always recommend that you consider doing is pre-planning your funeral with a funeral home. Go to the funeral home. Plan your funeral. Don't necessarily have to prepay it. I've had previous episodes on the difference between just pre-planning and prepaying and help you make decisions about that. But we are very big on pre-planning with a funeral home, and if you're going to be buried, working with the cemetery and choosing your cemetery lot. Now, is there still anything else that you need to do? Yes. That last thing that you need to do is to appoint a funeral representative. And why is that important? Well, in Michigan, you have no control over your body after you die. You don't own your body, which is why we can't sell parts of our body. So we need to have in place, or you need to have in place, appropriate arrangements or appropriate authority by a funeral representative who has the authority to carry out your wishes. Think about this. If somebody gets to the funeral home first, that would generally be the person that the funeral home used to work with in preparing a funeral. So if you were a second marriage and your spouse got there before your kids got there, that's who would normally plan your funeral. Or if your kids got there before your spouse got there, that's who would plan your funeral. Well, the question arises, how can you assure that whatever wishes you have about your funeral and burial arrangements are carried out? Well, you can pre-plan it. You can do that. That's a start. You can even include penalties if you want to in your estate planning documents, a penalty for someone who doesn't carry out your plan. For example, you might put a provision in a trust that says, this is what I want to be done at the time of my death, and if you don't do it, then you don't get what otherwise you are going to receive under this trust. So you can create a structure of penalties. Michigan law. What does Michigan law say? Well, there used to be, when I first started practicing law, there was no statute. It was simply a matter of who did the funeral home work with and listen to. Later on, more recently, the state of Michigan did create a statutory structure for who would have authority to plan your funeral. Unfortunately, under that original structure, you couldn't change it. You were stuck with a structure that the state of Michigan created for you, even if you wanted somebody else to make your funeral arrangements. Under the original Michigan structure, you were not able to change it. Well, fortunately, in April of 2015, 3.5 years ago now, the law was changed, and it now allows you to designate a funeral representative. And that funeral representative will have the power to make decisions about your funeral arrangements. So you can now decide who you want to have that legal authority. They simply have to be 18 years of older and of sound mind. The appointment of funeral representative has to be in writing, has to be dated, has to be signed by you, and has to either have 2 witnesses or a notary. And it can be in your will. It could be in a patient advocate designation, but our preference in our office is to create a totally separate, standalone appointment of funeral representative document. But however you do it, you now have the legal authority to appoint somebody to make funeral decisions for you. So what is their authority? Well, essentially, that funeral representative is going to have full authority, unless you direct otherwise, to make all decisions regarding your funeral arrangements, the handling, disposition, or disinterment of your body. It includes, but it's not going to be limited to, decisions about cremation, the right to retrieve from the funeral home and possess cremated remains immediately after cremation. Now, what if you don't appoint someone? You let the state of Michigan, under the statute, appoint someone for you. Well, there is an order of priority. So if you don't choose a funeral representative, the state of Michigan has already chosen a funeral representative for you. And there will be an order of priority under which that is going to occur. You know, oftentimes when I'm talking to clients, and particularly at seminars, we'll have a discussion about, do you want the state of Michigan to figure out where your estate is going to go? And most clients will tell me no. Well, probably true. You also don't want the state of Michigan to appoint your funeral representative. And you again do that by having that document in place. Now, it becomes even more important to have the funeral representative appointment, because a funeral home in Michigan today is generally going to require written approval from that funeral representative if you plan to be cremated. So the problem is this. Think about this. Let's say you don't have a spouse, you have 5 kids. Well, if you haven't done an appointment of a funeral representative, in that case, the funeral home is now going to require all 5 children to approve of your being cremated. It's important to make sure that you have in place an appointment of funeral representative. Now, you still want to pre-plan your wedding, or your funeral. You still want to, I just received a wedding invitation today, so wedding was on my mind, but you still want to make sure that you pre-plan your funeral so that you have it all in place. So it's as simple as the person that you've appointed simply has to go to the funeral home and implement the plan that you already have in place. Now, obviously, too, should go without saying, make sure that your funeral representative knows about your funeral arrangements. It's very much like the rest of your estate plan. You don't just do this and put it in a book and put it on a shelf and not tell anyone that you have done it. Because if you don't tell them and they don't know that you've done it, then that person that you wanted to serve as your funeral representative isn't even going to know that they're supposed to do it for you and won't carry out your wishes. So, without a funeral representative, until you have a funeral representative appointed, your estate plan is incomplete. Obviously, if we can be of any assistance to you in putting together your appointment of funeral representative, please call the office, 517-323-7366, or again, go to DoyleLawPC.com, click on the virtual office link, and follow the links to self-schedule your appointment.